Welcome back to day 5 of this 14-day series where we'll be making San Francisco-style sourdough bread next week. But first, this week, we're still working on making our very own sourdough starter from scratch. So on the first few days, we've mixed our initial flour and water together and then refreshed it by feeding it more flour and water along the way. If you've missed any of the videos, I've put a link to the playlist here so you can catch up. While we all started with the same basic recipe, we're working with different flours with different types of amounts of wild yeast in them, different types of water, and different ambient temperatures. With all these variations, it's no surprise that people are seeing different results. Some are seeing wild growth, and some are seeing almost no growth at all, and some are seeing a clear liquid called hooch that forms that we generally want to try and avoid. That's why in this session, we'll be answering some questions I've been receiving from you guys over the first few days that'll help the group as a whole and make sure you're keeping your sourdough starter on track. The first one I've had is from several people asking about the thickness of the starter. If your starter happens to be thicker than what you see in these videos, well, that's nothing to worry about. You can find that this happens even if you've measured everything perfectly. It's because different types of flour absorb different amounts of water. So one flour might look thick while another one might look very thin with the exact same amounts of water. As long as it's wet enough so that the flour is hydrated, that's all that really matters. If you want though, you can feel free to add or remove a bit of water in your feedings so that you get the same consistency you've seen in these videos. Keep in mind though, that in general, wholemeal or whole wheat flours will absorb more water than white flours. So as we transition our starters to white flour only, you might have to adjust the water amounts again to keep the same consistency. Okay, so the next question is about the clear liquid that's forming on the top of some starters. So this is called hooch, and it's produced by the yeast when they run out of the starches and sugars to eat. So it's a clear sign that they're hungry and need to be fed right away. Just pour the hooch out and then proceed to feed it as usual. You might find your starter doesn't grow quite as fast on the next cycle, but that should bounce back pretty quickly. But what if it doesn't? Well, unfortunately I've had a few people writing in with this problem as well. If your starter's had a lot of hooch on top, or it starts to smell really sour or vinegary, then we've got a bit of a bigger problem. Starter should go from smelling like raw flour when you first feed it, to more of a sweet and yeasty smell as it ferments and grows. If it has a bad smell to it, you need to take immediate action. My suggestion at this point would be to pour off any hooch, then stir in your starter and discard everything except 30 grams of the starter. Then add 100 grams of wholemeal flour and 100 grams of water for a special feeding. The idea here is that we can take enough of the yeast and bacteria that have been developing already and place them into a nutrient-rich environment where they can hopefully rebalance and get back to working and smelling properly. I've also got some general questions about starters that had initially been active but are not very active anymore. Even if there's no hooch or bad smell, this could be a sign that something went a bit off in the process. It could just be that a happy equilibrium wasn't established between the yeasties and the good bacteria. So the same advice applies here as in the last answer. Just carry over 30 grams and give it a special feed once or twice and you should see it bounce right back. Okay, so the final question we'll cover on this video is about how do you know when your starter is ready? So a nice happy sourdough starter contains both wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria. Don't get scared off by hearing that though, this is the good type of bacteria. When you first create a starter, these two little guys are trying to figure things out in this new world you've created for them. They need to find the right balance where they can happily coexist and where they are the main players in your starter. When you're first establishing your starter, there could be other types of bacteria that might be present, but the way that we feed it keeps it at the optimal state for the two players that we want to win out. So these first few days are all about promoting the growth of our wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria and inhibiting the growth of anything else. Okay, so now back to the question about when a starter is ready to use. Well, it's ready to use when it's consistently rising tall and peaking at roughly the same time each feed. In our case, we're also transitioning it to white flour, but this is more of a preference for going on to create San Francisco style sourdough, and by no means is a requirement for sourdough bread in general. So how long does this take? Well, it can vary. I've seen it take as little as just a few days if the stars align, but quite often it takes about a week. Remember as well that how high it grows, as well as how long it takes to peak, depends greatly on the temperature you keep it at. If you don't keep it at the same temperature every day, then you're going to see different results each day, even if you already have a happy and healthy established starter. So do try and keep the temperature consistent each day, so you can easily see when your starter is really properly established and ready to bake with. Okay, so I think that's a long enough video for today, and I don't want anyone to become too bored, so we'll end it there. Many thanks to everyone that submitted questions when I asked on my Instagram story last night. If I didn't answer your question here, then I'll make sure and get back to you individually with the answer. So now the final part of our video is, what should you do today with your starter? Well, as a reminder from the last video, you should be either at option A or option B for now. You should continue from A to B and then hold at B until your starter is rising and falling in a strong and predictable way. Some might be ready for the next step by tomorrow, but others might take a bit longer, which is no problem at all. Just take your time and follow these steps, and I'll have the next step ready for you by tomorrow if you're ready to move on. So that's it for today, but if you have a question that I didn't cover, please go ahead and ask me in the comments below. And if you're enjoying the series, how about sharing the love with friends and family? If you're watching this live, then we're all stuck in our homes anyway, so why not give them something fun to do with their free time? Okay, well that's class dismissed for another day. I'll see you back here tomorrow for the next step. Bye for now.